there's very few things that can get me out of bed this early in the morning on a Sunday, especially when the clocks go back, especially when I drove back from Birmingham last night. Went really well, by the way. Thank you. It's because I was told that somebody who wrote a book which I thoroughly enjoyed reading, Peter Oborne, was going to be on. I've read a couple of books about Pakistani cricket for a while, and I've got to confess, when I was reading this book, I was kind of looking forward to skipping forward to my own generation. It's just one of those things, right? I started watching cricket in the early 90s, so I kind of assume that anything that Pakistan did before the early 90s was, kind of pointless and didn't deserve my attention. But this book kind of opened my eyes to all the kind of subplots and stories of Pakistani cricket, and it all kind of started before Pakistan itself was formed, and Pakistan's contributions to Indian cricket in the 30s and 40s. And what fascinated me most, Peter, and certainly in the early part of the book, was the story of Abdul Qadir and the great Abdul Qadir and Fazal Mahmood and their relationship, and how he persuaded Fazal to hold off on playing international cricket for India and serve as a policeman for a period of 6 years before, and included in that deal was marrying his daughter.
Yeah.
That's
may I just jump in and say
course.
We've got 40 minutes. Would anyone like a coffee, a comfort break? Do I roll you another cigarette, Peter, or are we just cracking on? How are you comfortable, both of you? Yeah?
I'm blissfully... I would love another coffee.
A coffee,
and a
fine.
cigarette maybe would be in due course.
Okay, fantastic.
You do roll them very well, Katie.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well,
Right, I'll vacate my seat for Gary. And Charlie, cigarettes, coffee, just coffee.
Black
okay,
coffee would
all
be
right.
I feel like I'm in like a Las Vegas casino in the 1930s. Anyway, the first thing they offer you is a
fewer gangsters.
Fewer gang. Well, not none. Let's put it that way. So Peter, I want to ask you. What was it like, kind of uncovering that story of that kind of love triangle? I wonder if you'd mind surmising it a little bit for us.
yeah. Of course, it wasn't Abdul Qadir; it was A.H. Qadar.
Sorry, A.H. Qadir. I beg your pardon.
Who was the and Fazal. That was actually quite fascinating and wonderful because it meant going back to the old city of Lahore, which is one of those parts of the world which is completely unchanged, really. Qadar, who was the first captain, brought up in the just near the old Bati Gate.
Oh yeah.
Of Lahore, and it's that little area there is a little bit like Barbados. But about 4 or 5 of the first Test cricketers of Pakistan all were brought up as youngsters, within about 100 yards of each other.
It's extraordinary.
And they all would go and play cricket in the fields outside Old Lahore. And the two most important was Qadar and the immortal Fazal Mahmood.
Oh yeah.
Who was the reason why Pakistan, when they did take to Test cricket eventually, won so many of their early matches. He was a really great bowler. And the story of Fazal, who's in a way a much more important cricketer than A.H. Qadar, is the story of the birth of Pakistan, in the sense that, and I can tell the story of Fazal as a very young man. He was about in the 40s during World War II. He was playing. He emerged from Islamia College, Lahore, as so many of them did. In fact, 7, I think, of the first Pakistan team played for Islamia College as one college in Lahore. And he just, as an 18-year-old in 1944, he just burst on the scene. He was chosen to play in the Indian team, led by Amarnath, who also came from Lahore, importantly, the Hindu Amarnath, to tour Australia in the winter of 47-48. And he got that, and he was chosen in March. And he assumed in March 47 in fact, that there would only be one India at that point. The partition hadn't been fully settled, and anyway, independence wasn't. It was seen as a year off, so he was happy to be chosen for an all-India team, an Indian team touring Australia. And he went back to Lahore, and he was invited by Amarnath to go down to Pune for a training camp. And the day he left Lahore for the training camp is the most momentous day in the history of the subcontinent, the 14th of August 1947. So he took a train with his cricket kit out of Lahore, and I've tried to follow his journey, and he would have sort of seen the burning villages, the kind of, I don't know about the massacres, but he will have seen the trails of people moving, and he got down to Karachi, and then in the headwinds of the greatest mass migration in history, he made his journey from that Karachi somehow, I think he flew in the end, down to Bombay, where he joined Amarnath in the training camp in Pune. While they were at the training camp, Lahore was in flames. Amarnath had been brought up in the Hindu quarter of Lahore, and while he was there, the home where he'd been brought up was burnt, along with all the other homes, completely destroyed. Oddly enough, I can find no reaction from Amarnath to this. It just didn't appear to affect him. I'm not saying it didn't. There's no sign that it did. But basically, their home city, Fazal's home city, these dreadful events. I mean, the Hindu quarter was surrounded for days. Eventually, the Muslim mobs burst in, and they killed everybody they could and burnt it down. I mean, it was just the most. And cricket is going alongside. And so, anyway, actually, the training camp was a washout, literally a washout. It just rained all the time. And so Fazal then decides, Amarnath instructs his team to go back home and pick up their kit and prepare for the tour. And so Fazal gets on the train. On the way to Bombay, he's attacked by a Hindu mob. And the great C.K. Narayan, Indian batsman, fends off the mob with a cricket bat, very symbolically, and saves the life of the young Fazal, who's then 19, I think. And then he somehow gets back to Lahore. Very difficult. He was warned he'd be killed. He went via Delhi. I think he flew probably again to Karachi, and he got home, where there was this great family debate about was Fazal going to join the Indian team, or was he going to stay in Lahore? And he, in his 2005 autobiography, gave the impression that he decided on principle for Pakistan. I don't think it was like that at all. I think that he wanted desperately to go and bowl at Bradman. It really kind of, but it wasn't. Mian Saeed, one of the great founding fathers of Pakistan cricket, arranged for Fazal to marry his daughter. And then a few days later, he was suddenly offered mysteriously a job in the police force. And so this was what was. So Fazal went off and became a policeman, but it meant a life without cricket, because there wasn't any cricket to speak of in Pakistan, because India at partition seized everything. Really, everything went the way of India almost, including Test status. It was critically Test status. And so, in the first 7 years after partition, I counted them. I think there were 6 first-class cricket games in Pakistan in 7 years, in the first 7 years, which meant that Fazal had no opportunity to really to play. He took up badminton and hockey and things, and he was sent off to the northwest frontier anyway as a policeman to. And so he really he despaired really of ever playing the game at times. So that is the story of. It's a very moving story of early Pakistan Test cricket. And then, finally in 1952, they got their Test status. And in the back end of 52, at about November, I think. In fact, almost exact. I mean, this time of year in 1952, A.H. Kardar led the first Pakistan team to India, and it was a momentous moment. Pakistan got defeated in the first test in Delhi, and in the second test, of all places, Amritsar.
Yeah.
Sorry, not Amritsar. My memory is failing me briefly. In the second test, they amazingly won his historic test victory, and Fazal took 12 wickets and put Pakistan on the international map.
And of course, he would do so well when he came to England as well. He won a lot of fans over when he came to England, of course. Fazal, but it's an extraordinary story, and you write about it in so much depth in the book. It was really one of my favorite passages. And as I say, I started reading it thinking I want to get to Wasim Akram and Waqar Yunus and Shoaib Akhtar and my contemporary heroes. But it was a really moving story, and it really it really makes you appreciate what you have now in Pakistani cricket, because it really, when you talk about humble beginnings, that's exactly what it was. Can we fast forward a little bit, because there's so much in here, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the Ayub Khan administration in the 60s. So I think the chapter is in the book is 11, which is called Cricket in the Shadows of War. Obviously there's a lot going on there politically for Pakistan, and this has a knock-on effect in the cricket, and specifically the administration of the cricket. Administration of cricket in Pakistan, and this is probably plausible to anybody who's known anything of Pakistan cricket for more than 2 days. It's always been something a bit, it lacks consistency. Administration of cricket in Pakistan. Is there anything fundamental that you found that's caused this over the last sort of 60 years?
Well, the structural things are Karachi v Lahore. I'm not, and the second one is the fact that the patron of the game is the president.
Yeah.
This is also the case in Sri Lanka and I think maybe India, but but critically in Pakistan. So when Ayub Khan seized power in a coup d'état backed by MI6 and the CIA. The CIA and MI6 don't like democracy very much, not very fond of civilian governments unless they're in Britain or in America, but abroad they prefer dictatorships. And so they installed Ayub Khan in the late 50s. And so what does Ayub Khan do? He came up with the immortal phrase, "When war is not going on, the best way of encouraging team spirit is on the cricket field." So he wasn't very interested. He took a very pragmatic attachment to cricket. So the first thing he did, Ayub Khan, was to move the headquarters of the Pakistan Cricket Board, what was then called the Board of Cricket Control of Pakistan, from Karachi, where it started, to Pindi, his military headquarters, and he installed it in his own military headquarters, in the General HQ, which was a statement of the militaristic intentions. Actually, the Ayub Khan's arrival coincided with a sharp decline. I don't think it's a coincidence either, because it became a vehicle of his military dictatorship. And having got off to a flourishing start under civilian rule, cricket under military rule from the late 50s to 1971 really went into abeyance. And it was only under Bhutto. I'm not saying it's just, I think it's just the spirit of the age. When democracy is restored to Pakistan in the start of the 1970s, that cricket really starts to take off again with the emergence of the great Zahir and Imran and Javed. They all emerge under this period of civilian rule. So, Ayub is fascinating because you can see in so many ways how he tried to use it as a form of military propaganda, but also because he banned all public meetings towards the end, cricket matches actually became fora of political expression.
Yeah.
Hence the story of become a great friend of mine, Aftab Gul,
Okay.
Aftab Gul, who is now a radical lawyer in Lahore, he was a student leader in the late 60s, and he was a reasonable cricketer. But when the English touring team arrived in '69, there were student protests all over, democracy protests all over Pakistan, and the cricket. And Ayub Khan had to select Aftab Gul because he was the only person who could control the crowd.
Wow.
And so when there was a disturbance, old Aftab would go and raise his right arm, and the disturbance would stop.
That's extraordinary, wielding that kind of power.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is one of the bizarre things about Pakistan cricket. What was keen to talk a little bit more about was the fact that, and as you allude to, the fact that it's always been politicized. There's no real separation between politics and cricket in Pakistan, and those are the two most common topics of discussion. Whenever there's any kind of, Pakistani, when there's an old school Pakistani gathering, even in maybe the East End of London, the men will go and sit, and the women will go off and sit on one side and talk about certain things, and I don't know, I've never been privy to that discussion, sadly, and the men will go off and talk about cricket and politics, and they've always been together. Even now, as you say, the patron of the cricket board, in fact the chairman of the cricket board is appointed by the Prime Minister of the government. The current chairman of the cricket board is Najim Sethi, who of course served as the Chief Minister of Punjab for a short amount of time as well. And there's, we can talk for ages about the politics, but there's some enigmatic players who you take the time to pay tribute to so beautifully in the book. And one of my favorites was the story of Shoaib Akhtar. Now, he was always one of my favorite players, despite some of the wacky things he's done on and off the field. He's just he's so exciting to watch. But and I did read his book as well, which was it was something, wasn't it? Anyway, you talk about his humble beginnings in a little passage called Night Watchman's Son, not to be confused with the Night Watchman that would come into play against Jimmy Anderson in the evening, but the Night Watchman at a petrol station.
Yep.
What was it like, kind of uncovering the tale of Shoaib, and not just Shoaib, but so many other kind of Pakistani fantastical cricketers?
Well, actually, I was a bit lazy with Shoaib because this autobiography, which is ghosted for him by a woman social anthropologist. Anybody who hasn't read it must read that book. It's a glorious book, and he's very lucky in his biographer, and she really deserves a huge amount of credit. So here you have Shoaib Akhtar, who's the son of a night watchman. He hardly ever meets, as a result, his father, because he comes in when Shoaib's going off to school. Mother is obviously formidable, as so often with great men or great cricketers. The mother, and it tells a story when she saw his forehead when he was a little boy would glow in the dark, and I think a holy man told her that this meant that he would be a great man. His name would be known all around the world. Same thing happened to Imran. Same sort of thing happened to Imran. And so he's poorest of the poor in Pindi, and he, as a result, because it's difficult to break into the first-class game without connections and without, he teaches himself, and he just has this sense of extraordinary destiny, which is because he ends up becoming the first man to break the 100-mile-an-hour barrier. And a real force. He's just a force of nature, Shoaib Akhtar. And this is the other story I just love about him, because he can't break into the big sides. But he hears that in Lahore they're having a training day to choose a sort of an academy. So he hitches a ride on the top of a bus. Needless to say, he doesn't pay because he hasn't got any money. He just jumps on the top of a bus, avoids the attentions of the conductor, arrives, got nowhere to stay the night, and eventually manages to find a man with a tuk-tuk, and he lets him sleep in his little bus, and he says, and it says the final conversation is, he says, I'm going off to learn how to play cricket, and one day I will play for Pakistan, and when I play for Pakistan, I'm going to come and visit you, he says. And when several years later, after many ups and downs, Shoaib eventually does play for Pakistan. The first thing he does is go and re-find that driver who paid him that great that poorest of the poor, the man who gave him a bed for the night when he had nowhere to sleep. Shoaib Akhtar goes and finds him and tells him thank you very much, and tries to give him some money, and he won't accept anything. He says it's the honour of having. It's one of those stories about Pakistan which makes you fall deeply in love with the country.
Yeah, it most certainly is. He was an extraordinary cricketer. He was flat-footed. There was so much that could have gone wrong in that guy's life. It's incredible that he made it to where he was, and he played as much cricket as he does. And if you read his book, you'll get to hear on a regular basis about the problems with his knees and the fact that he had to have fluid removed from his knees almost before every game at one point. It was really bizarre. Anyway, let's get on to something really, really pleasant. I was talking to Manny Cohen, another one of our commentators, the other day. We had a whole discussion about covered drives and the greatest covered drives in the game, and he suggested that he thought Ian Bell might have the greatest covered drive the game's ever seen. And I said, well, there's so many other contenders for that throne, and something that came to mind, I just had to remind myself of the player's name, but you mentioned in this book that you thought Saeed Ahmed, the Pakistani right-hander, in the sort of early 60s. He had one of the greatest cover drives the game's seen. What was it about Saeed Ahmed's cover drive? And there's a wonderful picture of him on page 114 of your book, kind of rehearsing that cover drive. What was it about it that made it so, legendary?
Yeah, Saeed Ahmed is a very interesting. He's now a preacher.
Wow, okay.
He's now. I also have a picture in the book of him as a holy man. He's the first major cricketer to become very religious in Pakistan. And I went and visited him, and there's a photograph by my collaborator Richard Heller took actually of Saeed Ahmed. He was the first great batsman to emerge after the original band of heroes. He arrives in the West Indies tour of 1956, I think it was. And he and Hanif Mohammed, who is such a great player, and again, his role in just holding the early batting together was incredible. But Saeed is a very, very sophisticated player, and plays some brilliant innings. He starts to suffer from psychological problems fairly early on.
Okay.
He finds it difficult to go out to bat in pressurised situations. And there's a great changing of the guard in 1971 tour when they go and play. He had the number 3 slot, and it was that first match of the year against Worcestershire. And actually, Worcestershire had Van Holder, who was West Indies medium fast bowler, I'd have said. Saeed didn't fancy it, dropped down the order, and somebody called Zahir Abbas. Have we heard of him?
Yes. Rings a bell.
Yeah, he came in, took the number 3 slot, and that was really the end of Saeed in a way, because he lost his nerve. But it is understandable that you lose your nerve.
Sorry, your boss is chomping down, is on the other line. There's some great pictures in the book in general, actually. I really enjoyed looking at them. There's a great one, apropos of nothing else. There's a picture of A.H. Carter and Len Hutton wearing these incredible overcoats. They wouldn't be out of place in a Bugsy Malone kind of situation. It's very, very, very cool. Directly below that, there's a picture of Justice Cornelius presenting a prize to the probables of the Pakistan women's cricket team at the Gaddafi Stadium in 1970. The women's cricket in Pakistan seemed to have it seemed to be going reasonably well in the 70s and the 80s. It was it was developing at least on a par with the rest of the world. And then there's this kind of sharp decline in women's cricket, which is, of course, come full circle now, and Pakistani women's cricket started to take off again, kind of in the face of adversity. It's a difficult word to say, isn't it? Adversity.
I'm so pleased. I really devoted a lot of time to women's cricket. As you say, in the 70s under Bhutto.
Yeah.
It started, but then of course Zia arrives, makes his horrible or disastrous alliance with the right-wing parties, and really women's cricket stops. And the first 5 women's World Cups were played without the benefit of Pakistan playing for them at all. And the story of how it starts is down to 2 women who I believe are utterly heroic. The Khan sisters of Karachi, and they deserved. Both of them should have statues. I've interviewed them. They were playing cricket in England in the early 90s. And they told me they were on the edge of the England team, but they were told they weren't English. So they went back to Pakistan and they placed an advertisement in the newspaper for cricketers, women cricketers. And they were fortunate in the sense their father owned a carpet factory and they had some money and some land in Karachi. And so they invited and about 40 people, most of them, 40 women, most of them hockey players. Some of them have never played cricket before, answered the advertisement, and they started to put together a team. And there were the death threats. It was very, very brave thing to do. I think if a father wasn't able to protect them in the compound, it probably would have been impossible. But they got themselves registered with the women's cricket or global women's cricket authorities, but they then ran up against a second problem, which was the classic problem of Lahore, which is the great administrative centre by then and Lahore refused to recognise them and had all the political connections, but world cricket did. And there was one cricket World Cup, I think it was, where they weren't allowed by the Pakistan authorities to leave the country. And so they all got into their aeroplanes dressed as sort of ordinary people and put on the kit in the plane and arrived. I mean, it's a very dramatic story. And of course, they were not, because there was no women's cricket infrastructure at all in Pakistan, thanks to the policies. Thanks to the refusal to acknowledge that women could play cricket, that they were very bad. They used to get absolutely slaughtered to begin with, but that has changed, and there is now lots of money in the game. The women's cricket has its headquarters under my friend Mrs. Bushra Ajaz. And
you've got some fun friends, I've got to tell you. You really do. I mean, it has. It's really heartening to see where the game has got to now, because it's really, women's cricket in Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan are becoming one of the more respected countries amongst women's cricket. They play a good standard of women's cricket. In fact, a Pakistani woman holds the record for highest individual test score in women's cricket.
Indeed.
So, it's great to see where it's got to, and the story is extraordinary of how it got to where it is. I always thought it would make a great movie, especially that passage about them going onto the plane, in kind of plain clothes, civilian clothes, and coming out the other side with. It's almost like a weird Shawshank Redemption subversiveness type thing going on.
Have they managed to capture sort of the public attention in Pakistan? Is there support for them within the country, or is that still a bit of an uphill battle?
It's really coming on now. I was in Lahore last year. Last year, I watched a women's cricket match in the Bagijina.
Oh, beautiful! And
what was the first thing to notice is nobody. There was no security. It wasn't an issue. They were just playing, and there was a lot of people watching. And now on TV, it gets mass audiences. It gets mass audiences, and the quality is now very high. Yeah. I mean, and I reckon they will. Within the next couple of World Cups, they'll start to win one, won't they? I hope.
Do you think so? I hope so. Obviously, there's a diehard fan of anything Pakistani, but I think they might still have a way to go to catch up to the likes of England and New Zealand and Australia, the big guns. Gary.
We've got the occasional question coming in for Peter, and this is Nakul Pandey, who's a Guerilla himself, and he says, what is Peter's opinion, and indeed prevailing opinion in Pakistan, of Inzamam ul Haq's tenure as captain?
I mean, Inzi is, we were discussing the use of the word great. Inzi is a great. No question about that. I think it was a very difficult period. The match fixing issues which surrounded Inzi. He doesn't emerge very well from the Qayyum report. Non-cooperation is what's put against him, but not. But I mean, and so I think he was such a glorious batsman, the glorious batsman, and I like to think my favourite Inzi is the way that Imran. It's a tribute to Imran Khan, who spotted Inzi and insisted he got him into the '92 World Cup team, and despite the fact that Inzi himself didn't want to play, forced him to play, and then of course he won the semi-final and the. What a great player.
Is it a compliment to, I mean, amongst the criticisms made of Pakistani administration in the book, that they do seem, however, to be able to make Mavericks work within the side? I mean, obviously Shoaib Akhtar's relationship with the administration was very tense by the end, but that someone like Inzamam al-Haq was able to build a successful career. He's the kind of personality within an England setup you just couldn't see him surviving, I don't think.
Yeah, remember that? The Oval Test, when was it, in 2000?
Of course, yeah.
I mean, I actually, he was quite a handful, obviously. Going back to Shoaib Akhtar, the person who comes out, the administration was brilliant. General Taqi Aziz, who was criticised for not knowing anything about the game, but actually, if you read Shoaib's book, gave him endless support and understanding. So no, I think you've got to praise, and yet there is something. It's a brilliant point, Charlie, about because the thing is so flexible, you get these geniuses emerging from nowhere at a moment's notice, which you never get because the English setup is so structured that you have to sort of, you have to dotted all the I's and so on. But the off spinner, I've just forgotten his name. My favourite story is the amazing story in 1980, isn't it? When the Aussies are over, and the Aussies have got some decent spinners. It's the Karachi Test, and they need some spinners for the nets. The day before the Test match, Tausif. It's the story of how Tausif gets in the Test team. And so they whistle up some club cricketers, and nobody can play Tausif in the nets. And then, as he gets back into the taxi, he says, "Hang on, you're playing tomorrow." And Tausif's first Test match, he takes 7 wickets and wins the game for them, having just come out. And that would never happen of all these flannel fools who run English cricket. Would never allow it.
I'll give a little story about Shoaib Akhtar, which concerns a brief spell he had at Surrey. And I was there sitting in the pavilion on a Saturday afternoon. It was a county championship game, and Shoaib Akhtar had been named 12th man, and it was no wonder because he was carrying a bit of timber, didn't look entirely fit. But as 12th man, he brought the drinks on all day. But moreover, he also signed just about every autograph for every kid who was waiting at the boundary there, had limitless patience, was full of charisma, and not for one moment did he duck his duties as 12th man. They were paying him plenty, I suspect, but it kind of goes a little against the grain of Shoaib being something of a prima donna. He certainly wasn't that day.
No, I think he's an utterly wonderful man, and that's... You can think of all sorts of fine cricketers who would never have dreamt of either doing a proper 12th man's job or let alone what you've just described.
Do you think there's also a willingness in Pakistan to tolerate conflict within the side? So, for example, when there's a clash in the dressing room in England, it's seen as, God, management's failed, captain's failed. Whereas in Pakistan, maybe I'm going too far on that, but there seems to be a bit more of a relaxed attitude to, okay, these are a lot of talented young men. There will be arguments in the dressing room, and that's okay. Or...
I think I haven't thought about that point. I think that's very interesting. They're much more creative, and if you look at there isn't this sort of one of the tragedies of English post-war cricket is this sort of home counties approach to the sort of the minor public school, the Blazers, and if you fall out with the authorities, Tom Graveney and Peter May, or Gubby Allen, his malign influence on the game, and then the sort of the Mickey Stewart, Graham Gooch, and now this sort of wretched academy system where you can't get in or out of the team, and interesting conflicts has been embedded in each. I'm thinking aloud now because I haven't right from the start. So in the first team, it had this conflict between the great Fazal, who won the matches, and Qadar, who captained him, and they'd known each other since they were boys, but there was a huge rivalry for all sorts of deep reasons. And then if you go look to the great 80s, Imran and Javed, the Imran, Lahore, Imperial, Javed, the street fighter from Lahore, Javed, the street fighter from Karachi, and yet that synergy was just stunning. And so, yes, I think there's a lot in what you just said.
Can I just ask you a little bit of a Peter, and I really want to ask you about this because the Pakistan Super League, which is like kind of the culmination of 6-7 years of thought about this T20 league in Pakistan. It's happening finally in February. It's happening in the UAE, but it's happening. People are involved, foreign players are involved, all sorts of pomp and circumstance. It looks great. We're very excited about it. But there was a time in 2008 when it was first being mooted by Naseem Ashraf. Now you talk about him and Ijaz Butt, and there's kind of two questions here. One, why were so many people so happy to see Naseem Ashraf go as head of the Pakistan Cricket Board? And did you ever did Ijaz Butt ever speak to you about being interviewed? Because he was because you had incredible access in this book. You got to meet so many people, interviewed so many players and characters of the game in Pakistan. But Ijaz Butt was one that eluded you. Why did he not? What was his issue?
I don't know, actually. I endlessly tried to get him to talk to me because he was then chairman of the cricket board.
Yeah.
So I got an introduction to him via Giles Clark, who ran the PCB. I wrote him 3 letters. I just never even got a reply.
Wow.
And almost everybody else was just completely cooperative.
Uh-huh.
So Ijaz Butt is one of the most calamitous figures in the history, possibly the most calamitous figure in the history of Pakistan cricket. He played in that 56 series against West Indies. He then, but whenever something goes badly wrong with Pakistan cricket, Ijaz Butt has the habit. He's always the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I would have put all of this to him, but he perhaps wisely avoided my attentions.
Did you get a chance to, after the book came out, did he ever talk to you, reach out to you, anything like that?
Not at all.
Oh dear, that's a shame. What about Naseem Ashraf then? Because he was the guy who came. So he at the time came up with the idea, theoretically, of Pakistan having its own version of the IPL.
Yeah, very good idea.
Especially in response to the ICL, which we'd lost so many players to. So I know the players are coming back out there. I advise everybody who's listening to my voice right now to read Wounded Tiger by Peter Oborne because it's full of fascinating insights into Pakistan. I've followed Pakistan cricket for the 31 years of my life. I didn't know sort of 4/5 of what this book details. It was a fascinating read. Sorry, your 2 cents on the Pakistan Super League.
Well, it's wonderful it's happening at last. Although one thing I would love to have talked about as well is the terrible things which the Indian cricket is doing to Pakistan cricket at the moment.
Oh, I think we should definitely make room for that discussion. Maybe alongside the play, if we can.
Meanwhile, Pakistan are batting on. That's a mistake by Misbah.